Welcome back. This is parts 2 and 3 of showing you how to use a spreadsheet to analyze physics data. And in this part, we'll be discussing how to enter your data into the spreadsheet and how to use the autofill tool to fill cells. So let's take a look at our spreadsheet layout and let's start entering some data. So I'm starting out with a very rudimentary spreadsheet. And what I've done is I put a title up here, I put my name, and you'll notice the way a spreadsheet is laid out, I'm divided into columns, A, B, C, D, E, F, all through. You can scroll over, it goes on for quite a ways. As many as you need, believe me. And I also have rows, row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in this, each one of these blocks is called a cell. This is cell A1. So in cell A1, I have my title that I've typed for this spreadsheet. And you can see it shows up here in this formula bar is what this is called. In cell A2, I've typed my name, and you can see that show up in my formula bar. So I can actually, to edit this if I wanted to, I could actually just double click into this and grab my letters and change something, maybe put a space between the G here, hit enter again. Or I could go into this, jump up into the formula bar and edit up here. So I can take out that space and hit enter, and it changes it. And to type something into a cell, all you need to do is click on the cell and start typing. For example, I put X values here. I really want Y values. And as you recall, I'm going to put some additional titles on here as well. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to put up above here, I'm going to put my units for each one of these. My time is going to be in seconds. My Y values, originally I put in centimeters. I want to convert those Y values to meters. The other thing we mentioned that we wanted to do, we wanted to take those Y values and we'll actually make them, instead of looking like an object's moving upward in space, we'll actually move them downward. And I started dropping the object around 1 meter high, so I'll start dropping from 1 meter. So I'll just call this variable Y drop. All right, but you'll notice what I'm doing is I'm sort of setting up a table. This is my data point number. And here, let me just change this to data number. So it's my data point number. And to enter my data, once again, my only data that I have is my position that I measured with my ruler. And I wrote those down on my strip of paper, and I just transposed them right into my table here. I just typed them all out. So I already did that, didn't want to waste your time. There's about 35 or 40 values. And we'll manipulate this in a moment. Some other things that I'd like to do, for example, because this is a free fall situation or a motion situation, I'd like to list my initial conditions for the object. For example, I have Y naught. And what I'm doing here is I'm right-clicking on my cell, and you'll have to see if this is the same way in other spreadsheets. But I can actually, under format, hit the format cells. I can click on a subscript, and now I can put my 0 there. So there's Y naught. I need VY naught. And I need AY. And I'm going to, once again, I'm highlighting those two numbers that I want to put as a subscript. I right-clicked on the cell to get the formatting. I'll hit that as a subscript. And same thing on this. Highlight what I want to change into a subscript. Hit format. Hit subscript. OK. So it's a little bit of example of formatting our data. So we need to know what the delta T is for our timer. Now up in Microsoft Office, I can insert a symbol delta by clicking on my symbol tool. And I've used this several times. All my commonly used things are showing up right down here. And I'll go ahead and insert a delta. So I need to know what delta T is. I'm going to express this two different ways, actually. I'm also going to call this a frequency. By the way, the variable for frequency is capital T. And the units for these I'll put over to the right. I'll put the number in the middle. The units are in seconds for the delta T. And for frequency, it's actually the inverse. It's 1 over seconds. Also known as hertz. All right, so these are just text labels I'm putting in here. By the way, speaking of that, when I type in these numbers down here, only put in a number. Do not put in any units onto these, or else you will not be able to calculate these, because it'll be some sort of crazy mix of numbers and letters that the computer can't understand. So I'm just putting in cells with numbers, and if I want to put any units, I'll put a title up top, or I can put a title over to the side. Now you notice right now everything looks sort of messy. I've got things overlapping cells and so on and so forth. Things aren't centered. I'll take care of all of that later, just to show you all at once how I can nice and neatly organize them. But let me go in, and I'm going to just to show you what I'm actually putting in as my original values that I'm entering. I'm just going to highlight those, so just to show you what I'm putting in originally, and then everything else will be done by calculations. So I'm going to go to the home, and I'm going to fill this with, I'll just fill this with a light color, maybe a light green, just to show you what numbers that we actually entered. And I'm going to move this up. I'm going to grab this. So you notice I grabbed the cell. I can grab the edge of the cell. I can move it all around. For the timer data, I'm going to put one more thing down here. How many frames per tick? And of course, that number was, there was 4 frames per tick. And our frame rate was 240 frames per second. Now you notice when I type in this number and I have something in the cell, it sort of overlaps the data here. For example, if I go up here and if I put a 1 up here, you'll see the rest of my title disappears. But we'll fix that later when we do formatting. So our video was done at 240 frames per second. I'll put all my units over here. Here, I'll put a title here. Here's units. And I'm just trying to make these nice tables of data, so if somebody comes along and looks, they'll be able to understand what we're doing. So I'm going to highlight these 2 numbers just to show that those ones also, we manually type those in. Everything else we'll do on the spreadsheet we're going to calculate. Now, I don't like that I've jammed this up against my other title here, so what I'm going to do is I'll grab all this data and I'll grab this box. I can grab any edge on it, and I can just pull this down one block, and so I can see things. I can actually highlight, as you see, a whole row by clicking on a row heading, or I can click on a column heading to select a whole column. I can select multiple columns by clicking and holding on a column and pulling it across, or I can do the same thing and click and hold on a series of rows and pull it across. If I wanted to highlight the whole spreadsheet, I can click right here in this upper left corner and it highlights everything. Alright, so what I would like to do is, I don't like the fact that these aren't aligned, so let me just add in, I'm going to insert one row. So I did insert, and it automatically looked at rows and did that for me, as you can see. I'm going to move these things up a little bit. So here's a title here, and here's my title here. Alright. Let's assume that my initial height was 1 meter. My initial velocity was starting from standstill. And my acceleration, let's assume, is negative 9.80. And meters per second, since I don't want to take the time to put a square in there. Once again, I'll highlight these in green to show that these are data that I'm starting with and I've entered manually, not calculated. So let me add a few columns to show a calculated velocity that's experimental. I'll put experimental after this, and I'll do the same thing. I'm going to change this to experimental if you don't mind. So here's my experimental y value, my experimental velocity in the y direction, and here's my experimental acceleration in the y direction. And to the right, I can also put down what the theoretical value should be. So let me just do that. So given a starting point, we should be able to calculate what the y, vy, and ay are theoretically as well. So here's my y. I'll put theory. And once again, I'll take care of all the formatting to make this look a lot prettier later. But these are the basic things we'd like to calculate, and then what we can do is we can take this information and graph it. So the next thing I'd like to show you is the most important feature, in my opinion, of a spreadsheet is the autofill tool. And combined with, as you see later on, absolute and relative cell references, it is the most powerful feature of spreadsheets. So my autofill tool, what I'm going to do for my first example is to show you how to fill out my data set numbers. Very easy thing to do. I'd like to put the numbers 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth down to however many, but I really don't want to take all the time to type them in one by one. So if I were to take my first two numbers and highlight both, I'm clicking and holding to select both of these cells. You notice when I select a range of cells, the upper left corner is always going to show up blank and all the other ones will be highlighted with whatever color. So I'm going to select my first two cells here, and you can see which ones I've highlighted by the fact that there's a heavy black rectangle surrounding them. And if you'll notice, there's something unusual about this black rectangle. Down in the lower right corner, there's this little block. And if you hover your cursor right over the top of it, your cursor will actually change. If you watch, I'll do that, and it changed into a little plus sign, a solid plus sign instead of an outline plus sign. And that solid plus sign is your autofill tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and hold, and you watch what happens. You can see to the right here I've got a number that's scrolling 5, 6, 7, and as I scroll this down, it actually is telling me what it's going to put into each one of these cells. So it's assuming, since I put these numbers spaced by 1 apart, that I should follow that pattern through the rest of these, so I don't have to do all this by hand. Let me give you another example. What if I wanted to go by, I don't know, 0.1, 0.3, and so on and so forth. Let's see what it does for that. 0.1, 0.3, 0.5. It steps by 0.2 increments. So I've gone back to my previous list. You can also use the autofill, for example, if you wanted to copy the same number over and over into a cell. For example, what if I wanted all these to be 1s? I can actually grab the autofill tool, hold down the Alt key, and it will copy a 1 everywhere. All right. And you can play around with the Control Alt Shift keys, and they have similar features like that.